Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio, ben trovati a tutti per questo appuntamento, in parte online e in parte in presenza in aula. It is a very great pleasure for me to welcome you all here in this room, as well as with our online streaming. To introduce this important meeting. We had the pleasure to be able to put up for all our important audience here. So I would like first of all to thank you all our colleagues that made this event possible. It was an amazing work and job that has been done, especially from our Commissione IT Terzo Settore, which is our internal division at our institution for IT engineering and what we normally call here in Italy the third sector. As we, most of our associated engineers mainly do their job in civil and mechanical engineering. So our colleagues that are mainly involved in IT and information technology and all the correlated fields are still a minority within our institution, but obviously not in our society. So I don't want to steal too much time out of this important event. So it is a very great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Condry. And obviously, Professor, thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. And it is really important for us to have you here. And I would also say that it's almost impossible for me to summarize in a few words the present and past career of Professor Condry, so I won't go in detail because I'm surely going to forget some important steps and achievements that your career made possible for you to achieve. So I won't take any longer. I will pass on to Vincenzo Tizzani for a brief introduction to this meeting. And obviously, I hope everybody will enjoy this appointment. Okay, thank you.
I'll leave it to no use would. Good evening. It's a great pleasure to have this lecture today with Michael, that is a great friend of us, and I wish to thank him to be here, and I wish to thank all the people that are connected with us by distant learning system, and the person that are here in the hall. This lecture is important because not only because Michael is a really important person in this matter, but also because times are changing, and maybe it's the right moment to introduce some aspect of the technology that is going up. And AI is certainly the key to enter in the new world, as Americans say, for a disruptive technology that should be introduced in our society. I don't take any longer your attention and introduce Michael Condry to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm honored to be in this beautiful city of Bologna. I have been here before, but it is a very lovely city, and I'm very honored to be your guest. And we don't need to spend any time talking about Michael. I'd like to talk more about where technology is going and how my field, which is engineering and computer science, has come to intersect with medical fields through healthcare informatics. And it is a very interesting area. In fact, I just left a leaflet of a conference we're having in Brussels on this, but I can, anyone interested, I can send the email link to you. I'll leave my card here. So let me get into the point about what kind of a vision we're talking about here. Let me make sure I'm using the mic correctly. So if we take a look at medicine, medicine has made significant advances. I mean, think about the invention of the RNA vaccine. Vaccines usually took years and years and years to develop and test. And in 6 months, we're all getting our shots. So medicine has used technology to make very many advancements. CRISPR is another excellent example. And one thing that is discovered in medicine is that early prediction of almost any condition leads to the most successful and least expensive form of treatment and cost. Most successful treatment, least cost. That's a very important fact because early detection in medicine, maybe you see a doctor once a year. That 1 year could be very important. And some things you don't trust anywhere near that frequency. At the same time, we've had some major advancements in the technology area. Many of them are around the area of Industry 4.0. That includes sensor technology, that includes new computing technology, networking, and artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is key to connecting those pieces together and getting information out to make decisions. So these things are creating digital devices that can indicate medical conditions. This is used in the hospital and doctor's office, but more and more frequently, they're coming up with things you put on your wrist or things you put in your house that also detect things. We'll talk about those a little bit. So we have both medical from the traditional medical community, and then we have this consumer world, which is coming up with information, which today is not that well used, but it's there. So if we have this information and we can organize it in a way that it's, number one, secure, number two, available to who has the authority to access it. And we have technologies today that can make that work. So we need device criteria, like how accurate is this? We need ways of data management, which is mostly what I'm going to think about today. Medical tools and ways for doctors to use a system that's manageable, security, privacy, and standards. And this event that I'm hosting in October is mostly about standards and regulations in this area. So with that in mind, let's talk about where does the data come from? Well, we all know that doctors keep records, right? Some of them have very organized record keeping systems like Epic. It's a very, I think Bayer has one on others. They have very organized data. They're mostly used by big groups, Sutter Health, Kaiser Permanente, whatever your popular medical group is here. They're used by big groups because there's an expensive IT department to run it. But then we have a large number of, let's call them regular doctors that are out there that just might have a simple record. I think they've pretty much gone away from the paper record, like we saw in the Moscone Museum, and gone to electronic record, but it's still just words. You know, this patient's showing some signs of early cancer, blah, blah, blah. So we have those two sources of information coming from the doctor, the professional side. And also on the professional side, we have testing equipment. You go to the laboratory, they stick you with a needle or take other samples of what comes out of you, and they run tests on it and draw conclusions from the chemistry tests. Very important. So what are we doing? We have certain things we're measuring, and we're using chemical features. So this is going to lead us to, with the technologies of Industry 4.0, it's going to lead us to consumer devices that can do these measurements. I'm wearing a watch. It can tell my temperature. It can give me my heart rate. It can give me my blood oxygen. It can do an EKG. They claim reasonably accurate, but there's no scale, of course, that we all agree on what that means to be reasonably accurate, but it's doable. But there are also devices that are in your home, blood pressure machine. Well, they have the old kind of blood pressure machines, but now we have blood pressure machines that will talk to your phone or will talk to the internet. So you now have a more active data record. We have a device that people can wear on their stomach. It measures their glucose level for people who have sugar diabetes and allows them, instead of just giving themselves a stick every once in a while, allows them to accurately determine how much medication they need. I'm on the board of a company called Clinic AI, and we make a device. Just want a pin. We make a device that sort of looks like this with a box on the end, and it goes inside your toilet. And when you use the toilet, it's actually using multiple sensors to detect information. And then in the cloud, we can analyze that information and determine various symptoms that relate to the colon, like colon cancer. And that's not the only one. There's a new company in Japan that's doing a similar technology. So my vision is that not too long from now, we're going to be able to put a device like right here near my vein, and it'll come up with various sensories, mostly using radio and heat technology. And from that, I can actually extract what my chemical CBC or complete blood test would actually be. So we're getting from the point of using chemistry in the traditional sense to using electronics plus artificial intelligence to determine the chemistry. And this is happening today all around the world. It's a bit fragmented. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the last piece of data we want to mention is individuals. My stomach aches. That's not very helpful data, but it is data. I have a reference here. I'll leave my slides. I have several references in my slides. So if we had this data and the information was organized, secured, and available, what could we do? Well, first of all, we have a way of being proactively managing an individual's health. Proactive because I mentioned earlier, one of the most important things is early detection. Detect early, treat best, lowest cost. So we can have these devices start looking, oh, this guy's showing a blood problem, or his heart's not working quite right, or early symptoms before you get to say, I've got a stomach ache, I need to see the doctor. Otherwise, get it, well, the body is sending the message, but it hasn't gotten up here that you're maybe having a problem. And actually, that turns out to happen frequently in medicine. So we can't see a doctor every day, but you can wear the watch every day or run your blood pressure test every day. And that gives the information they need, plus the electronic test of, oh, you've passed this marker, let me send your doctor a message. We also have a need for telemedicine. The pandemic brought telemedicine up explosion. But when you have a telemedicine with a doctor, they're working with half information. They're working with what you say. And that's important. But my experience is I go to the doctor, I say, I'm having a back pain. He says, okay, let's do you an x-ray. But he does a test. Now, with this technology, with the organized data, instead of just having your words, he'll also have the test data you can look at and draw a conclusion. Even if you're in Italy and your doctor is over in America, still works. So that's individual care. Medical and pharmaceutical research goes on today. They use limited samples. They're large, but limited. And so what happens with medicine is they invent something, they do their sampling, and then they put it out to the world. And then they find out that there are people who have conditions outside of their sample base, and so on. And then they have to fix the problem. Where really research on medicine should be a continuous thing. I invent it, I get past the first test, I distribute it, now I track how do people react with it. It needs to be a continuous test. Just like in the factory, you needed to have it continuous operate. And public health, like tracking pandemics and so on, is clearly a need. And also industry. If you were to ask Bayer about their problem they had with this Roundup stuff, you would find they lost quite a lot of money. Whereas if in fact they have medicine, they have data to track whether or not this person is just sort of half making it up, or this person actually has a condition, that they can know if you have these kind of conditions, don't use Roundup. Saves an enormous amount of money. So industry can use this in a very effective way to be innovative in managing their business. So you may not think about medicine doing it that way, but that is a very important option. The world today is global, and the more we share science and share information in a proper way, the more we will all advance. So that is a very important aspect. Create an enormous amount of business opportunity. For example, I mentioned doctor's notes. Well, can we take the doctor's notes and turn it into information that we could use in this data? It's a good question. Is there a way for a doctor to make it easy for him to enter the information? So there's a lot of new devices and new tools that could be developed to make the process work. And those are engineering tools. In the future, we will get to what industry's working on today. Industry's working on the digital twin, where you have a simulation and you have the real thing, and sensors in the real thing allow you to keep the two in complete sync. In the future, we would love to do that with human. We don't understand the human well enough today, but we're learning parts. Cardiovascular system, we're learning parts and how things will affect that. And so this is a progressing, but it be beyond my lifetime before they get reasonable. But it would be so wonderful to need a new medication, and the doctor tests my digital twin to see what level of and what brand of medication will work best to treat me without causing my body's bad side effects. Because the pharmaceutical people don't know all my body; they only know for their test samples. So that's the perspective. Now, what's the problem we have? Well, we have a big elephant. So business needs to operate. We can't regulate business so it's not functional. So in any design of a system, it's got to work for business, but work for business and all the other players, not just business. We have the individual, which we've talked about a lot. Individual needs to do it. We have these consumer devices that are sending data up into the information. We have the medical records from the doctor. We have the government regulations, which I point to the rear end because that's normally where the government comes involved. And then, of course, we have the needs of research. But it is an elephant because people tend to look at a little piece of their problem and not the integrated system. And one thing I'm pushing to do is to get the world to look at the integrated system so we can all share each other's data and still let these other problems be solved without creating monopolies, without excluding people, etc. So it's an elephant, and we need to get around the elephant. So let's talk for a moment about consumer devices. I give some references. Again, I'll read my slides here. We have wearable devices. We have the Dextrom monitor you put on your stomach, and it tells you how much glucose you need. There's a patch that just recently came out. It checks your heart. So if you have an possible indication of a heart thing and you put this patch on once a day, it checks to see whether or not maybe it's getting worse, maybe it's not getting worse, and it can send that data to the doctor. And then we have Apple Watch and many other devices that are coming out to measure a variety of standard measures plus new things. Then we have devices. I mentioned the Clinic AI toilet monitor. Omicron has a new blood pressure monitor that talks to the internet and tries to match more of your characteristics to what measure, rather than a standardized measure. It tries to be more precise about it. And there are two kinds of measures. There's kind of standard tests like blood pressure or temperature, etc., glucose level. And then there's indicators, like you have an indicator of colon cancer, you have an indicator of a heart problem. And a lot of these indicators are these things that we need to find through early detection. So the technology allows us to detect these things through blood chemistry analysis, which you can do in the lab, but we're starting to be able to do it on your wrist or your arm. And waste analysis, again, you can do it in the lab, but we can do it electronically now. And the electronic version is adequately accurate to get the information. So I published a paper 2 years ago on the clinic AI, and we're getting about 80% accuracy. And the other consumer product just gets about 75%. It's enough so that's actually within the level of what you get from the test until you go to the doctor and he gives you a colonoscopy. That gets him closer to 100%, but it gives you enough indication. And all these technologies, they're using sensors or using artificial intelligence, and they follow a cyber physical design. And we have this issue of data quality, like, is this device as accurate as his device? And we don't have a standard there yet. So we need to consider that. So let's think about how this architecture normally operates for, I said consumer devices, but it's really beyond consumer. It's consumer and hospital. So we have a local system which has many sensors. They're typically radio, optical, temperature, and smell are the ones that are most common. And these devices have generally a simple processor. They're meant to be inexpensive home devices, the consumer ones. But it has a communication mechanism, either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and has some way of identification. So I can identify it by a little clicker, but it's partly smarter to use something like Bluetooth, where if you just make sure that they bring their phone with them, or you send a message, say, I'm not sure who this is, tell me who used it. Both of which would work. So this is where the data, core raw data is collected. So then you have an edge device, commonly a cell phone. It groups this data together with some additional information, encrypts it so that it's private, then sends it out to the cloud. The cloud has the AI engine, decrypts it, and it searches for multiple possible symptomology based on the data that came. They can send a message to the user, and if the user gives it permission, it'll send a message to the doctor, or most importantly, to a data informatics system. And it keeps records about this individual. So this is typically what a cyber physical system looks like. In a factory, this would be sensors on the machines, motion sensors, temperature sensors, optical sensors. This would be an edge computer, possibly bigger than a phone, and the cloud would be in the cloud service. And security is a little different than in factory because it's more private, but it follows the same exact cyber physical model. So my observations are, one, the devices, they give both symptoms and for multiple conditions and health measures like temperature and so on. And to me, it's most important that these are non-invasive. You don't need to do anything abnormal to get this information. You just wear the watch, use the bathroom, take your blood pressure. You do normal activity, and it now using that data plus its intelligence to make predictions. This is the most important. It's not something like you have to do something special. The laboratory is your house and your watch. And the information has to be usable to the doctor. if they want to make medical use. They have to trust it, they have to use it. And we need some sort of device criteria so we understand how accurate that data might be. And the design of these systems can use internal privacy to keep the data private, how it works private. That's a good business model. But when it goes to the information share, any particular measure needs a standard way of sharing that data. We don't want to have Apple's temperature versus Google's temperature versus you name it. It doesn't make any difference. You know, we want temperature and then how accurate that particular device is. That's all we want. And the data has to be secured. And we need the businesses to be successful, but not monopolistic. No medicine is going to work monopolistically. So it needs to have a sharing model. They can do good business design, make good business money at the same time. They're helping mankind and the individual. So I just made, this is from a much earlier paper a couple of years ago that I did with a colleague of mine in the business school of San Jose State and a doctor on how digital innovation is changing the world and some of the measures that are continuing to grow. And more recently, if I updated this graph, it would be the growth is going much more rapidly. So this leads us to, okay, we've got all this data. How do we put it together? How do we keep it organized? So I view it as three cooperative worlds. One, we have all these consumer devices that are producing data. Two, we have the medical devices and medical doctors. So what we need is a middleman who serves basically as an exchange server. I collect data from here, it's standardized. Collect data from here, standard, and then I separate it. This is private. This is what could be shared with the right authentication. And it has to understand the business of medicine, not just the business of engineering, which makes it tricky. For example, I might go to one doctor, he works for this one firm, they use this one data aggregator. And then I switch doctors, they use a different data. The data belongs to me, not to the middleman. So it's not the Google model, it's not the Facebook model, the data belongs to me. Clearly that means the service has got to be paid for. In America, it would make sense to have the insurance companies pay for it because it's saving them money. I don't know what would be the right model in Italy, but the point is that there should be a business model. So these companies work, and by the way, they sell the data, so the data makes good money from that, but they don't own the data. They just basically sell access to the data. So that leads us to the following picture. This is pretty much how I see it working. The patient comes along, they have a bunch of devices. These devices measure different technologies. They are not necessarily from the same vendor. They may be 4 on one watch and another source. We have to consider all those as possible. They take that information, it goes to this middleman. The middleman divides the information into two perspectives, which, by the way, are kept on two separate blockchains. This data is private. I can see it as the patient, the doctor can see it, and that's it. It would have my name and information about me so the doctor knows where to go. But my general symptoms, I have the following condition, I take the following medication, that should go in the shareable. We just need to prevent any way of somebody narrowing it down to me. That would violate privacy. But so we have two worlds. The aggregator has to connect them together for the individual and the doctor, but that's to separate them for the research perspective and other uses. The doctor also has records, and we should have a way, a tool, if you will, to synchronize what information the doctor wishes to share into the shareable database. And this is a solvable problem. So just to summarize, the data management perspective is that these consumer devices involve multiple vendors. So internally, how they do it, how they share between their AI engine, so on, that's all proprietary. They own that business. but the information to the aggregator has to be standardized by measure. This is a temperature. This is the accuracy of my device. And it doesn't make any difference which you buy. It'll come in across the same. And the doctor will see all the information. Well, I've been thinking later that this is not quite correct. We need information that the patient puts in and is not visible to the doctor. Maybe the patient wants to submit he takes some illegal drugs. That would help research, but he doesn't want to tell his doctor. The doctor may want to put in information that he doesn't want to tell the patient, but it's important to put it in the shareable. So it's rather a complex issue about authentication to each source of data needs to be well defined. But we're working on exactly how to do that now. In fact, that's part of what will come out of our event. All the users or players here, they're going to share data with the aggregator, and the aggregator is going to have to keep the pieces sorted, private, not private. This the patient can see, this the patient can't see, this the doctor can see. This can be shared with everybody. Security and privacy are the key responsibilities of the data aggregator. But I expect there to be many different companies, and they sell access to the data. Now, it becomes an interesting business model. If they don't own the data, they just own the ability to access it. So if they want additional information beyond what's in that aggregator, there's no reason they cannot work a business relationship with the medical group to say, I want more information about this particular group of patients, but they have to pay for it. Again, the business model becomes extremely important. It's not just the engineering. That's just being worked out. And unfortunately, businesses today like to own everything. They want to own all the content, all the data, and that's a problem. And I mentioned before that consumers move around, and when they move around, that may change the aggregator. So it's important that no data is lost in that, and no company can say, I'm not going to give that data because I collected it. No, because I want to, again, the individual and the doctor own the data, not the aggregator. They do not own the data. That's a big change from how many internet companies work today, at least in America. And I think there's an enormous opportunity for tool creation, tools for the doctors to use, tools for the patients to use, and it makes a great engineering opportunity for us, how to make their life more effective. And I can have another reference to a paper on that. So we have to consider the requirements, both the business and industry side. One, data comes from professional services, consumer, and individual. That's why I said we need something about quality. Even with doctors, we have no quality measures. But rather than get into that area, I would focus more on establishing quality of the consumer device and let the medical field work itself out in terms of quality. Individuals are useful information, but they probably don't know the correct code for what your condition is. I have a stomach ache. They don't know what that, there's a medical code for the particular problem I'm having. They don't probably know what the codes are. So security prevents the access to private data. I've already mentioned that it's a relatively complex model in terms of who can access it. We have a design for a dual blockchain, which will allow for this separation of privacy on one side of the blockchain and shareable on the second side, and a code which connects the two. So the aggregator is responsible to say, okay, when I show to the doctor or show to the individual, basically I have one big record. But when it goes anyplace else, the private stuff goes up here, and the others can only see in this information. And by having two separate blockchains, we're able to manage it that way. And to connect the blockchains, some sort of private code the company generates, puts the same code in both sides, and then matches them up. Well, that's turned out to be a solvable problem. There was a conference in November on blockchains, and I'm giving a talk just on this subject matter, how to solve it. Shareable data has to have more information than just the measures. It's got to know something about the people without breaking it down. So I might want to know about the age, gender or other characteristics like that. Maybe what part of the world they're from, not what street address, but maybe some regional information. I want to know what medications they have, and I prefer to get that from the doctor. And I want to know what medical conditions they have. And again, I would prefer to get that from the doctor because they can give the right codes. So a doctor in Italy can read that code, and a doctor in America can read the code and understand what the medical condition is. Where if you write stomach ache, you don't really get a lot of information. That's why they've already invented these codes, is that they're pretty much shared. So we just want to follow that model. And I keep stressing that the business people need to see a way to make revenue from it, and then they will engage. There's a lot of research opportunity, research in medical side, research in the engineering side, but the business model needs to be evolved along with it. It can't happen independently of business. This morning got the opportunity to visit the Marconi Museum, which is right outside of town. It was very well done. And some of the feedback that was given to me was that one frustration that Marconi had is that the scientific community didn't want to recognize his work because he did both the science and the business. And my perspective is he did the right thing. And that's one reason radio was so successful, because he brought the business part in with the science. And I think that is very necessary for this to be successful. So this is actually 16 slides all squished down into one. And if you wish to have more detail, I have little buttons here to go in detail. We can go back to this slide when you have tests and answers. So opportunity, if we had this organized data, well, we've already mentioned individual, proactive testing, general care management, telemedicine improvements, remote testing. All this is available to help the individual. Medical and pharmaceutical already does sample testing to get in the product, but this would allow to say, okay, now that you've done a sample, you need to track if it's still doing to the community you're targeting, because your community is now expanded beyond your 20,000 person sample into millions and millions worldwide. So pharmaceutical companies may not like that, but in fact, that will improve the quality of their medication and allow them to understand what kind of person has what kind of side effects. So rather than listing every side effect in the world, which they currently do on medications, they can associate or give to the doctor, these conditions will have these side effects, and therefore the doctor will know whether or not to use that medicine with the individual. Much, much better quality medicine. And it'll give us tools for analyze medical trends, pandemics, which we've all had our headaches over for the last couple of years. There's a very interesting perspective of research at the government level. So the government can make a copy of the shareable portion, not the private portion, and therefore they don't know who it came from. But they now have an aggregate of a large amount of data, and they get it from all the aggregators. And that gives them an ability to test. And I'm sure that any of you who have traveled have had the experience of going to a country like China, and the first thing they do is they check your temperature like that. In fact, that's a poor solution. That only says whether or not you have a temperature right now. You might actually have a condition that is just beginning to come or has just finished, and that information is not going to come out in a simple test. But if your watch said, okay, I can tell you the temperature for the last 14 days, and you gave permission to share that, then you're giving a lot more information. Also, I have a couple metal joints, and if my watch would say to the security people, expect him to have 2 metal joints, it's not carrying a gun. At least the machine can then be tuned to look for those things and say, okay, go through. That happened to me in coming to Germany. They now have a new machine, and they just let me walk through. But I told them I had 2 metal joints. So it can help our lives be better through travel. And we have mentioned before business opportunities, not just for medicine, but for many, for engineering, applying natural language technology and other areas that we didn't necessarily connect with medicine in the past. And the digital twin, which is a long way off, is the ultimate future. Although there are progress being made, there's a paper on how they've done a digital twin for the heart, which is relatively, at least they can test for some things. So they're able to do, progress is being made. The last thing I want to talk about is my opinion of where we need to standardize and get requirements. Number one is device quality. I don't want to know that it measures my temperature. I want to know that it measures how accurate that measurement is. Security structured so we can get this to work. The world is global. We need to consider international as well as domestic rules. And the design of the system has got to enable both. And then we have the technology summary. So with devices, we need to have requirements that industry accepts, engineering research accepts, medical community accepts, and that it's a key focus to this work. So I'm giving you some, again, my personal expectations of what's needed here. As I mentioned earlier, how a device works is kind of less important to me than how accurate it is. So the companies keep that how it works to their private business, what their AI engine looks like, how they figured it out, etc. I don't need to know that. I want to know how accurate my measure was. So to do that, I'm proposing a concept which I'll call it a path FDA approval. In America, the Food and Drug Administration provides the rubber stamp that says this is accurate, this medication is acceptable, this measurement is accurate. So that's sort of the official government rubber stamp. I'm sure they have a system like that here in Europe as well. So I pretty much believe most countries have a rubber stamp system for medical devices. But getting that rubber stamp requires a significant amount of work. So at least in America, almost all the companies, they make very high-end devices, very expensive devices that will cover all the testing costs. But a lot of the innovation and entrepreneurship groups want to start small, and they don't have a huge amount of money, and they also don't want to, here's a device to measure something, they don't want to charge you $20,000 for it. They want to keep it at a price you're willing to pay. So to do that, we need a stepwise improvement, something that starts small, that an innovator or entrepreneur can do, and then as the effectiveness grows, they get closer and closer to the rubber stamp. So I looked at it the following. This is just complete speculation on my part, please understand. So also some observation I've made with some startups in this area. First, you start in a laboratory. You test the laboratory. You get it to a certain measure, let's just say 70%. So now you're 70%. That gives you 70% in your laboratory, gives you that 1 star. So now you're a 1-star machine. Now you need to go next. So now you go do a sample. Some doctors go out and sample some things, sample in a real environment, but it's still a sample. But if the sample turns out to get basically like that 70% mark, let's say, then okay, maybe we'll give you 2 stars. So there's got to be a regulation to get there, and every measure is going to have a little bit different number here. For temperature, you certainly want to be 99% accurate, but for some of the blood chemistry, maybe 70% is good enough to get there. So this is ... And when you get to 5-star, you're using this huge informatics database to say, I basically have a massive sample that I can show the FDA that the accuracy of my device is consistent with what doctors are reading, and it doesn't have that many anomalies, and I can narrow down the anomalies, maybe. And by the way, I would then use this to improve my AI engine all the way whenever I find these anomalies. So that's the improvement in the AI engine. So I'm going from 1 to 2 to 3. So now I have a 5-star system. And once you're 5 stars, you're just at the door of the rubber stamp. You're not rubber stamp yet, but you're right at the door. And this is a much more economical approach for innovators than the medical approach, where you build the $20,000, the $50,000 machine, and the hospital can pay for it. Of course, you pay for it when you go to the hospital, but the hospital can pay for that. But our model is that these consumer devices are going to give us the most proactive medicine. So we need this quality measurement, and we all need to agree on a way so that you can build a product in Italy and I can buy it in America, and that standard will fit. So that's one of my points of my little event here is I'm bringing in the European FDA lead and I'm bringing in the American FDA lead, and we're all going to see if we can make the first step of this. So security is one of my background areas, and my first start with this was to look at what is a security challenge. So I built that into my informatics model. Here, there's going to be some private data. That data is me and my doctor. Secondly, there's data that's useful for research, analysis, and so on, and that's in this aggregate shareable data. And identity is known to me, my data, and identity is known to my physician. And I might say, switch physicians, that'll be switched. And the new doctor may make updates, but that's fine. Again, that we are the owners of that data, not the aggregate provider. I can use a dual blockchain strategy with a connection code to make this work. And they'll never have access to the private blockchain. Only the aggregator pulls it together for the doctor to see and for the patient to provide data. When the data comes to the patient, it knows which unit of the chain to put it in. Authentication is very important. In fact, I'll go into more detail, but we have authentication for the individual and their medical team. That's covers both private and shareable. But then we need to do advice analysis. We need to get to our 5-star system. We need to do medical research, take it beyond the initial sample that we do today and continually improve my product. And consumer devices, I mentioned, public health studies and international situations. I mean, this pandemic might have been better under control if we'd had this set up. And once it started, we could narrow the population down much more quickly. Well, didn't happen that way, and we've all spent too many years with masks on our face and not in airplanes and not sharing data. And then the requesting process as well as the support process has to be very carefully managed. We can't allow somebody who wants to be hostile to somebody else ask for a sequence of requests that'll allow them to narrow it down. That could be controlled by minimal population strategies, but it is a solvable problem, but one that needs to be built into the initial design of the system. It can't just be patched in later. Just like security has to be in the initial design. It can't be patched in. Authentication will be very important. The individual can access their personal data that they don't share, or they share with their doctor. And I was thinking later they might also have some data that they put in the shareable space that they don't share with the doctor, but we'll deal with that later. And then the doctor, they have the private data and they also have the shareable data. And we're hoping to make it so the medical team will update the shareable data so the codes are accurate and the medication is accurate and so on, allowing this tracking to go on. In addition, we need the consumer device and its stars. So we need to be able to track both in the system. But there are many others we mentioned, medical and pharmaceutical research. And I believe that although the pharmaceutical companies may not like it originally, they'll make a far better product if they continuously track what community it works well with, instead of just a long list of side effects, which is what they do today. What community works well, where it doesn't work as well. And it allows us for reevaluation of how successful the product, or where the product is successful and where it may be less successful. Giving much more data for the doctor to be a better doctor. And we've mentioned the consumer devices, multiple stars. We need to be able to do that in a way that's agreeable, not impossible for the consumer device companies to meet, but a pathway, not a rubber stamp, a pathway to the rubber stamp. And we have blockchain and international sharing. So to summarize the requirement space, we have the digital device, the internal design and operation of the device, that's proprietary, that's up to the company, and how their AI engine works and how they improve their AI engine also is their business. The portion that goes shared is standardized. This is a temperature for a 3-star device, and it's a temperature. Everybody knows, so regardless of the scale, they know what the answer is, and so we can unify it. In fact, we should all use centigrade. It's much easier. Anyway, the point is that the digital device uses standard information to the aggregator. We organize the data for best usage, but the security is built into the initial architecture. It allows the protection of identity, but it gives the most data for engineering and medical research and pharmaceutical research. And we do a clean separation of private and aggregate using a blockchain strategy and authentication. We have medical records that need to be updated, and here's an opportunity to build tools. One tool is a company is in California is building a tool that uses natural language processing to read doctors' records and extract out this information, what conditions they have, what medications are on, extract it right out by reading their word file or whatever word processor they're using. Whereas companies like Epic coded it all in there. Here they're able to do that. There's a company in the Netherlands that is able to read out cancer indications from, they're a couple years old, Lynx Care, a couple years old. But so companies are already working on this, and this is clearly you need some medical knowledge, but most of it is AI, computing, networking, our fields. We can't develop these requirements and standards in isolation. We need to work together on it. And that's one thing I'm trying to do through the IEEE is pull the medical group and pull the engineering group and put them in a room and let's work out on the standards. And I see that as a big issue. And I say security and trust is critical. And the reason that's important, I should say security, trust, and business is business needs to be willing to engage because they're going to make money. The doctors and the individuals need to trust it in order to share their data. And they trust it's not going to expose the doctor, it's not going to expose the individual, but it's going to help humanity. And that's what we really want to do here. So trust is very important. So we need to define the system and convince all the parties that the trust is there. That trust is extremely important. So I don't know how I'm doing on time here, but let me summarize. And I have some backup data. So the digital health devices, particularly consumer devices, are growing extremely fast. Every day there's a new test or new device coming out, and its accuracy is better and better, again, on a non-standard, on their scale. The data organization with security is critical. We need to work on the standards together because we can't have looking at one piece of the elephant without seeing the whole elephant together. Although we can detail the piece of the elephant with a group that's appropriate for that, but the elephant needs to stick together, not be broken. Security and trust is critical, and I view a significant quantity of business opportunities as well as helping humanity. And the business opportunities are well outside of medicine and biomedicine. There are engineering opportunities. There's an enormous number of engineering opportunities. And in a way, the pandemic has helped us say the opportunity is now, because if engineering can help solve medical problems, it opens the value of engineering much more. And since we're doing that to manage the factory, why don't we do it to manage the people? We have the trust, and in the future, we might get to the human digital twin, which will come in small steps. We're only in small steps in the factory digital twin. But think about it. Doctor sees you a condition and wants to give you a medication. Today, he makes a guess about what level of medication you need, and these are the 2 or 3. This one might work well for you. If I had a human digital twin, I would put the medication into the simulator and see what are my side effects. Does it work? Does it solve the problem? Fantastic. So before I'm invasive to my body, I check my simulator, and then it should be more accurate. It may not be 100% accurate, but if it's 85%, that's better than just guesswork, even intelligent guesswork. So I think that is the future. So this is a very abbreviated version of a talk which I provided at the University of Bologna that you, I believe, have access to, but we'll talk to Professor here about how to get the access. It's online. It's a 3-hour presentation. But you can reach out to me. I have some business cards here for my IEEE, and there's much more of my biological data on my own cloud service here. And I have some backup slides, but I think it's enough time for me chatting and opening the door for some questions.
I thank them for the claps. And yes, if as Michael said, if you have any question, please feel free to come here and to ask directly to him at the microphone, because you don't forget that we have more than 200 people that follows us meeting our meeting. So, Claudio.
Thank you. I can understand you better without the mask. I apologize.
So I'm Claudia Sartori. I'm full professor of machine learning and data mining here at the University of Bologna. And also I had some contacts with public health and electronic health. So first of all, I really thank you for your talk. It has been really inspiring. And of course, it raised more questions than it solved, as it should be expected. So
right.
That's good.
That's the intention.
So I really appreciate the metaphor of the elephant. It's convincing. And so I will make a single question. In Italy, we have a regulation of health, I think, quite different from the United States, since we have a strong public system whose main business objective should be public health before money, or at least without spending too much.
Theory.
At least in theory.
In theory.
Okay. And so what I have seen is that even if science is going fast, very fast, we have seen tremendous advances, and sometimes or frequently science is much faster than organization. Not organization of data, but organization of people and of public bodies. So
this is why I put the government at the rear end.
Sure. So my general question should be, how can we convince public organization to move some steps towards this new vision? Because in Italy we have a good system. In principle, it's the public health file, fascicolo sanitario elettronico, has been collecting data for, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years, but they collect mainly individual data just for the records. There is no usage for...
That's just this little piece of the elephant.
Yes.
But they're ignoring all this other pieces that's actually out there.
So, of course, standardization is really a key issue, but we should be also able to push organization to move and to use those new techniques. Of course, this cannot be done in 1 day or 1 year, but at least we should design a path. Thank you.
Well, I am 100% agree. That's the reason I put the elephant into my talk, is because we really, and that's one of the reasons I put this workshop together, is to bring in the government people and so on. I'm trying to put a workshop together at Stanford with the doctors and the engineers to try to realize that this intercooperation will lead to better humanity medication than any one of these operating independently. And so I think, to the government's perspective, if we can convince them that the system is trustable, that the data sharing will not violate any individuals, but will help humanity, I think the government will follow along. I've seen some reports of the government on consumer devices, and they were certainly written by the consumer device companies, not written by an independent regulator. And it was not written as these are the rules, this is just suggestions. So that's a poor way of doing it. We really need multiple fields to put their vision in. The government says, I want to control this, I don't want to control that. And we're going to realize that rules of Italy and the rules of the United States, and the rules of China are going to be different, but we can find an intersection for sharing, and they can have their privacy rules. We can have Italy's privacy rules, America can have their privacy rules, and we still can benefit. I think we can solve the problem and still benefit by having a trust with the government that there is a private data, and the government can say, this cannot go outside of the private data, and that's fine. And if one government says, I want to be able to access the private data, that's up to the government, not up to the thing. But I do believe, from a business perspective, if we go in the door with the data is owned by me on my data and my medical group for what part they contribute, the data is not owned by anybody else here, not owned by the government, it's not owned by the business people, it's owned by me. It does change the business model, but it forces regulation that is consistent and trustable, because the business wants to make money. And then when there's money to be made, they want to be able to make it. So I want to enable that. I want that to happen. I want my grandchildren to have much better health than I do. And so it will happen, but we need to kind of look at the whole elephant, not just one little piece. So to solve the problem, we need to get the heads together. And it's one reason I'm here, is to bring this up. One reason I'm having the event in Brussels, and several other events in planning that are trying to bring the different groups together and look at the whole elephant together and lead to solve problems. And we want to get government involved. I want government to come in and say, you've got to be able to do this. And I want to hear this. I want to hear why they want to do it, because we might be able to convince them there's a technical solution that'll give them what they want that may not be their words. And that's only gets out when you translate. It's like you have to translate from the doctor to the engineer. You have to play translator. It's a solvable problem, but it does require working together. I hope that answers your question. Would anybody else like any additional information?
Cecilia, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for your wonderful and very interesting presentation. I'm Cecilia Metra. I'm professor in electronics at the University of Bologna, and I'm also an active member in IEEE. So I think we met at some meetings. So thanks a lot. Your presentation was really impressive. And what I wonder is what you envision, of course, implies several technological challenges also, for instance, the use of digital twins to test some chemicals and so on. So I wonder, can you comment how far in time you see to be able to actually solve the technological challenges, and probably, as we were discussing now, how far it is to solve the regulatory challenges?
To be honest with you, I think the real challenge is not the technology. I've seen now a radio sensor that using artificial intelligence, and I played it here, I can come up with basically the traditional complete blood tests of the doctors. So I think technology is already there. I think we need a system designed with trust, government trust, doctor trust, individual trust, company trust. We need a system designed where business will be successful. Companies can innovate, they can make money, but they're not monopolistic. And we need multiple governments to work together with their rules for their side, but a shareable rules to work internationally. And I do believe the technology is secondary because it's happening so fast, it will solve, we'll be able to solve all those problems. We'll even maybe by the time my grandson is maybe got his PhD in computer science, he might, assuming that's where he goes, who knows, he might be working on parts of the human digital twin. But I think that's more solvable than getting the elephant altogether. I think this is the challenging problem. And I don't think we can do it by any one of these components standing on a throne and say, I'm the answer. We need to do it by a cooperation and thinking business needs to make money, individuals need their health improved, doctors need to be able to do a better job, and government needs to be satisfied, and then research needs to improve. I think everybody wants that. But they're too used to looking at just their part of the elephant. We need to look at the whole picture.
Any other question, or maybe also from people connected with us? Maybe should be any comments, any question to the relator. Maybe we can see there. If there is any question.
I don't escape. So where would
messages
where's
there is
I have webcam 2D, which I cannot transfer.
one of this should be messages.
Control, voice, video.
No question.
Okay. No, but this has been very good. It's been a very good exchange. So it's often thinking this way. I found many engineering groups and medical groups have to think on it for a little while. But we're talking about doing an event, maybe possibly in a Bologna. I would like you all to engage, and hopefully we could bring in some medical professionals with the engineers, and let's look at the elephant all as a whole. And if we can start doing it, then we can break up our pieces and solve it. Bring in the entrepreneurs as well, because they all have a good motivation to be successful, and we all benefit. Why would we lose? Thank you very much for your time.
I also wish to thank you that are here. now there's a small small appetizer for us, and I wish to thank Michael too. And please.
Okay, please. I left a copy of my presentation on this computer. You're welcome to.